So welcome back, everybody, to the second session of Energy Use in Buildings. We've got two 15-minute talks from Sam Hampton and then from Gavin Killip to draw you out of your post-lunch slumber. And I'll let them explain what it is. So hold your questions until after they've given both their talks. And also for those of you listening online, hold your questions and we'll have a good Q&A session at the end. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you. Okay, so local trials in the plural is probably a bit ambitious. I'm going to tell you about one. Tina earlier said there were several going on in Oxfordshire, and that's true. But I'm going to zoom. I think it'd be more beneficial to zoom in on one. And actually, I'm going to zoom in on one bit of this project because it's a very large one. But I will provide you a very quick overview first. So ESO is one of the prospering from the energy revolution's national demonstrator project. As Tina said, there's another one in Oxfordshire, which you heard about, Leo, and then one in Orkney, which is a particularly unique place in terms of energy. So we've got different vectors. The idea is it's a smart local energy system integrating different vectors of power, transport, heat, and storage. And here we've got various partners. So yes, that's an overview. This is a nice schematic of that of the project, how it all fits together. So on the top left, we've got grid scale battery. So we've got a hybrid battery, which is lithium ion and vanadium flow combined, connected to the transmission network just outside Oxford. And then we've got a transport work package, which is about EV charging. I've got another slide on that in a second. And then on the right-hand side is our heat work package, which involves tender manufacture of heat pumps. And we've got a clever trading company called Habitat that operates the battery and does lots of clever things with AI. And then us at the bottom, we kind of cut across the program doing evaluation. So I'm doing the kind of social science side of things, and colleagues in engineering are looking at in detail at the battery function. So yeah, I think I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I'm not the right person for that, but it's the world's largest hybrid battery, and so it's mainly lithium ion and 2 megawatts of vanadium flow, which is a type of battery that doesn't degrade, and so that there's synergies to having them together. And the plan is that it allows us to avoid curtailment of renewables. And at the moment, it's live, it's deployed, it's been trading for a few months, and as you can imagine, with high energy prices, it's doing very well economically, financially at the moment. On transport, again, quite briefly, because I'm going to go into detail on heat. With the project's got funding to help Oxford City Council electrify its fleet. It's got ambitious targets. It's going really fast in electrification. And what's great here is that we've been able to fund not just your average kind of Renault Zoe, but some really interesting kind of market first types of vehicles. So like a refuse collection vehicle, and different kind of tipper loads and stuff. So it's quite interesting. And yeah, I think we had some of the first when they were available in the UK. So we've also got a piece of work supporting licensed Hackney cab drivers in Oxford. You may know about the zero emissions zone, which is going to make life difficult for people who drive fossil vehicles. And so this is the kind of carrot to go with the stick of the zero emission zone. We've got a £5,000 grant, which is on top of the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles grant, available to taxi drivers, and a kind of try before you buy scheme as well to get them to practice, when they would charge, because obviously it's a very different kind of behaviour that they need to get used to. And then the super hub, we call it super hub, it's a public super hub, is at Redbridge Park and Ride. And there are currently, it's a building site, and there are 38 rapid and super rapid chargers going in there. And eventually the plan is that the council will consolidate its fleet at that site as well, because there is this huge amount of power, up to 25 megawatts at the moment. You know, in the foreseeable, that won't be scratched really. But this private wire is also now being built, which is exciting. So as you can see, the schematic here, the transmission site is where it says hybrid battery, and then the private wire has been built around the ring road to Redbridge Park and Ride, and it's connected the Oxford Bus Company on the way. So that's a potentially very exciting addition, because essentially, you know, the point here is that we couldn't charge that. We couldn't provide that much electricity through the standard distribution network. We're too constrained in Oxford, and so this allows us to electrify the bus fleet without costly distribution network upgrades. Okay, so this is the bit that I've been working on mostly in the last year or so. So slightly separate from the project, sorry, not from the project, but from the other work packages. We've got 57 social houses in Blackburn Leeds, which is a suburb of Oxford. And we've installed ground source heat pumps. So Kenza Contracting is the sister company of Kenza Heat Pumps, which is the manufacturer, and their business model is to sell ground source heat pumps to social housing providers. And Stonewater are one of those, and they've partnered with us on this project. And so, as you can see from the diagram, the idea is that they do lots and lots of boreholes. But if you do them at scale, you can connect up multiple properties to one borehole. Just so happens in Oxfordshire, we sit on an aquifer that's under pressure, so you can't go that deep. You know, other places in the country you can go up to 300 meters. We've had to stop at 90 meters, so it's actually worked out. We've got about one borehole per property, and so yeah, the idea is that you could connect. So it's a bit like a mini district heating system. And then in each property, you just have a very small shoebox sized heat pump with a hot water tank. And these are the kinds of people that are receiving them, social housing tenants. And this is where we've been putting a lot of our work as kind of the evaluators and the social scientists. So I've been talking to lots of the residents that have been using their heat pumps over the last year or so. And the key thing here, we were talking in the previous session about whether heat pumps can be how attractive they are and gas. Well, here we benefited in a way because we were replacing electric storage heaters. And as you see, people were extremely unhappy with their electric storage heaters and are very, very happy with their heat pumps, which is great to see. And then similarly, they felt that before, electric storage heaters are extremely expensive to run. Most of the people I was speaking to use prepayment meters, and they top up maybe £10 to £20 a time. And so they know exactly how much they're spending every day. And so it was typically £5 or up to £8, £9 a day on heating. And these are small properties. So, you know, the orange is a much nicer spread of opinions as to affordability. So most of this was taken, these surveys were filled out before the energy price crisis. And then as a kind of combination of the two, again, we see people not sacrificing their comfort to the same extent to save money. So that's a really good sign. But what we're doing on the project, you know, installing heat pumps in social housing is great and necessary, but it's not particularly innovative. So what the Innovate UK funded element of this is to try and reduce the running costs of heat pumps. So to be competitive, if not cheaper than gas to run. So even though these properties were replacing electric storage heaters, so they were typically save about 50% of their energy bill, these people. But when it comes to social housing that's on gas, which, for example, nearly all of Oxford City Council's estate is on gas, and they've obviously over the last 20 years been replacing storage heaters where they have had them with gas for various reasons, then it becomes a lot more difficult. So we want to demonstrate that heat pumps can be competitive. So the way that this is designed is, well, firstly, the heat pumps being equipped with load control capability, and then we have some clever software. So Switchy is the provider of the thermostats, and they're fairly dumb thermostats, but they're quite robust and well designed and easy to use. But Homely is the company that is a bit like the other Nest and the other ones you'll have heard of, but specifically for heat pumps. And so they are learning the thermal loss characteristics of the properties and the user preferences, with a view to being able to, well, they've got an API tapping into the Switchy thermostat, so that's how they're learning, but then they also can go the other way and they can take control of the schedule. And the idea is that they will take price signals from Octopus Agile. For those of you who don't know, that's the only time of use tariff that we have in the UK still. And this all has a big asterisk next to it because this is the model, but as many of you know, Octopus Agile has become kind of became unaffordable because the prices are pegged to the wholesale prices. They went up as wholesale gas prices and global gas prices went up. So that's the model, and the idea, just to spell it out, is that in terms of flexibility, Agile is usually most expensive in the early evening. 4 till 7 is when the price is most expensive usually. And so the idea is that the heat pump would come on, the algorithm would turn it on, and you would do some preheating. So if the user said, I want it to be 20 degrees in the evening, the heat pump would make sure it was 22, 23, and so at the end of the period that it was switched off, the tenant would still be comfortable. But it's been difficult for various reasons, and here are some of the reasons. So nearly 70% of the people in our study use prepayment meters, and that is some of those is because they don't qualify for direct debit because of full credit, but also a lot of them got happy with that because they're in complete control. As I say, they might top up once a week or even more, so they know that they don't have to fear being stung by an unpredictable energy bill at the end of the month that they wouldn't be able to afford. So, and the obvious thing to say is that a time of use tariff at the moment is incompatible. Just Octopus Agile doesn't work with prepayment meters. The challenge there is if they say, okay, if we can persuade them to go onto Octopus Agile, we have to say, well, actually you need a new meter. If it's an old meter, that's kind of fine. Octopus will come out and replace it at some point. They've got a big backlog and waiting list, and that will take 6 months. But also, if they've got a smart prepayment meter, then will Octopus come out and replace a brand new smart prepayment meter? It's not so obvious whether they would do that. So that's one barrier. There is a kind of general inertia and mistrust of the energy market. Amongst some of these tenants, most people I've spoken to don't switch supplier, if that's a good measure of engagement with energy. Certainly it's not, and they, as I say, they're very energy conscious and energy literate in some ways, but we would need them to switch supplier. So, and that's something they're not keen to do. And actually, that's fairly rational when the prepayment meter market is, you don't get much benefit from switching anyway. And of course, with the whole kind of getting used to flexibility, there's a behavioural element to that and an educational one which needs to be overcome, and that's not impossible. And in fact, to give Kenza credit, they have a very good kind of tenant engagement process where they talk everyone through, and everyone I've spoken to is really happy with how they've adopted and domesticated their new heat pumps. So yeah, the development of the software obviously took longer than expected. That's a pretty standard thing on innovation projects. And Agile prices, hit the roof. They've got a cap at 35 pence per kilowatt hour. And at the moment, if you go on kind of daily prices, it's hitting that cap for most of the time. So we were back in when we wanted to do this, when we wanted to kind of really introduce this flexibility trial last autumn, we were up against this idea that we just couldn't recommend it. We couldn't persuade them to go onto Agile because it wouldn't be in their best interest. And as you can see from this graph, in 2020 it made a lot of sense, but in 2021 it really didn't. And then finally, this is not essential for implementing flexibility trial, but one of the things we wanted to do is get, for those people who have got smart meters, get access to find out what they're using. Because one thing was that most people are on prepayment meters and they don't get energy bills, or at least they tell me they don't. Some might get like a summary once a year, and others just don't. Like it has moved online, they get an email, they're not really aware of it, that kind of thing. So getting energy consumption data has been really difficult. So one of the things we thought was, there's a smart meter that has all the data just there. Why can't we just access that? Well, it's extremely difficult, and we are there now. We've been working with a company called Hildebrand, who have a special arrangement with the smart energy, what they call it? DCC, the data communications company. Okay, and so yeah, we're there, but it's been very painful. I'm pretty much out of time now. So apologies for that. This was a really nice graphic that is about flexibility capital, and I think I like the two axes here that kind of says that flexibility capital is not the same as having financial resources, and in fact in social housing they don't have financial resources, but they may have more flexibility capital. A lot of the people I'm speaking to are retired, and so actually can be flexible with things like laundry as well. So and I think that this is colleagues from Mike and Gareth. I think this idea on the right as well, of thinking about where that flexibility comes from. Is it technology derived or derived from the user or the tenant? Is something we're playing with and thinking through. Okay, just finally then, the challenge on this project has been the removal of the RHI. This kind of installation qualified for the non-domestic RHI, and that got wound up last year. And this graph shows you kind of how the ask from the customer, which is the social landlord, has got bigger and bigger over time as eco has got wound up and the RHI has got wound up. And the replacement is the fairly significant social housing decarbonisation fund, but significantly that is arranged in a very different way. It's a competitive fund. And so now we've got Kenzo and lots of social housing putting in a huge amount of resource into bidding and getting 20% of the ones they bid for. So they're spending all their time modelling now and building and bid writing. So it's pretty problematic. I won't comment on the energy price crisis because obviously it is affecting electricity just as much as gas. So, but it's certainly a consideration. And I think it is worth saying that social landlords are very motivated. Lots of them have ambitious net zero targets and are doing this in the right way. But a lot of them, rightly, are doing fabric first and not going straight into heat pumps. Okay, I will leave it. Thank you. Sorry for that.
No, brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Just a reminder, hold your questions until after Gavin's talk, and for those of you online, hold your questions and either tweet them or post them in the chat.
How do I advance slides?
Try pressing right.
Right.
Okay.
Hello everyone, I'm Gavin Killip. I'm from the ECI Energy Group, colleague of Sam's and others in the group. I'm going to talk to you about market transformation to decarbonise UK housing. It requires a bit of a shift of mental perspective because I'm mostly going to talk about the construction industry, not the energy industry. Right, why bother with existing homes? I'm not sure I need to labour this point for this audience, but there's 29 million of them. It's a significant chunk of UK energy demand and CO2 emissions. The efficiency potential in homes remains very large. We need to replace all the fossil heating systems, so there's lots of focus on heat pumps. We know that we can achieve probably 50%. Going back to Nick's talk this morning, I think that's probably about right. 50% reductions is significant. We could reduce peak electricity demand if we're going to electrify lots of the heating in homes. That's where a lot of peak is, so there's issues there which we need to think about. But also, beyond energy, there are multiple benefits of dealing with energy in homes and energy efficiency. On the right there, you've got some of them. We can make them comfortable and attractive places to live in. There are significant benefits for health and well-being. We can cut people's heating bills, hopefully significantly. And also, there's a huge implication for jobs across the sector. The little pie chart is probably a little bit too small for you to see, but the key thing here is more than 80% of UK homes are privately owned. So there's issues there about public sector versus the private sector and what your solutions would be. And the other piece of sort of background is this isn't a particularly happy policy story. The picture on the right is from more than 6 years ago now, which is the Green Deal, which was supposed to be a flagship programme to insulate the building stock in the country. It failed spectacularly for various reasons. The one on the left, the Green Homes Grant, is more recent, from a couple of years ago. It also failed spectacularly. It was short-termist, it made assumptions that everyone was motivated only by cost, and the industry lobbied hard against it before it was instituted, saying, don't do this, it's too short-term. If you want this change, make a long-term commitment. They were ignored, the thing was announced, 6 months later it was announced. So there isn't a very good history. So my question for you is, how do you stimulate the market for retrofit when you have almost no demand? There's no real consumer interest in it. Nobody really understands what it is. And you have no capacity to do it. There's no interest from the industry to really do it either, because there's no demand. But there's no demand because there's no supply, and there's no supply because there's no demand. So which do you stimulate first? How do you do it? And my answer is you do a bit of both at the same time. So it's not chicken and egg. It's sort of everything together. And my colleagues in the room will correct me if I get this wrong, because they're more expert on this than I am. But market transformation is an approach which has worked in the past, particularly around appliances and products. Very different business with buildings, but nonetheless, you've got the FLIR energy label. There's a picture there. I thought I'd stick in the European one. Why not? But you've got 3 broad pillars: the minimum standards, some information systems, and some financial incentives in the market. The other principles are important. We introduce these things over time. We have some quite good quality technical and market analysis informing how the thing is developed. You achieve it through long-term engagement with the industry that you're seeking to transform, the market that you're seeking to transform, and do things stepwise. So you sort of set them stretching but achievable targets and keep ramping it up. That's the theory. Can we make it work? So this is a series of slides which are kind of cutting to the chase. There's lots of things that don't work. So these are, in my view, some of the reforms we need. So we have systems of information for energy performance in buildings, energy performance certificates, but I don't think they're anywhere near good enough. I'm not the only person to say that, but I think we need much better quality surveys, actually more expensive surveys that really relate to the real building. We will need to have some legislation and regulation to ban the sale or rental of properties based on those EPC ratings. And actually, that's one of the reasons why the EPC ratings need to be better, because they need to withstand that sort of legal challenge, actually, telling someone you can't rent this property. We could have a system of information through logbooks or passports connected to the buildings, and we could use smart metering to help some of the data collection. I would emphasise, though, that all of these data systems only really work if the data is complete and up to date, and the data needs analysis. It's not clear to me how that gets done or gets transferred onto the ground, but they could help. Plenty of reforms needed in the information. The minimum standards, part of the problem here is that we have a real disjunction between the standards for the building itself and then the standards for the occupations who are affecting the building. There are no standards really for the occupation. But I think we need to bring the two together. We have building regulations, but they have been rather, they've not been changed as much in the last 10 years as they could be. They need to be tightened regularly over time. We have a system of building control in this country where local authority officers go around and check things, but they're under-resourced. They've lost more than 25% of staff in 10 years since 2010. There's huge issues there about resourcing. The key one, I think, here to focus on is the next point, the license to trade. We have a totally unregulated building in this section. So people can make a living perfectly well without doing all of this stuff. And that's the key point. So can we introduce a minimum standard for skills that enables people to do the stuff that we think needs to be done and takes away that ability to make a living perfectly well without doing it? That's a key challenge and quite politically risky. And then there's a whole issue about cash in hand business that gets done, people avoiding VAT and various forms of tax. Can we find a way of instituting penalties so that people are actually, not going to do this? If they're doing stuff out of the regulated system, there's some kind of sanction. I said a lot of quite big things. Skills, education and training. Again, if you look into the skills, then it's not a particularly happy place. We tend to focus on sort of STEM skills. There is need for a much better technical understanding of things like how we install the heat pumps and what have you. But it's not just the technical skills. There's a lot of things that evidence that we need like stronger business management, we need stronger communication. I would argue that some of the people who are going to be talking to the customers are the ones who are going to be explaining to them how these things work. And that's also key. The training that we have tends to be rather low level, so NVQ2, which is sort of equivalent to GCSEs. We probably need more 3, 4, and 5, which is A level moving into first year degree level. So sort of intermediate level skills, not the high end, but not low high. We have some interesting innovations in terms of skills. So HAS 2035 and 2030, which Marina may have talked about this morning. There are some of these innovations, but they need to be much more integrated into the system of further education. And as I said, if we regulated the labour market so that you have to have an accreditation to take part, then that's a way of introducing the skill, because the training then becomes your route to becoming an accredited part of this industry. And when you look at also the way that we handle apprenticeships and other forms of training, a lot of the responsibility is down to the individual firm or the individual trainee to find their own apprenticeship in this industry, which I think is probably wrong. If we want 600,000 heat pumps a year and this army of people to be doing this work, I think we need to be supporting them into training placements and employment much more strongly. Costs and financing. Cost is important. I'm not going to say where I think money should come from. There's plenty of people saying they've got money and they'd like to put it in, but not quite yet. I think the capital has got to be fair and affordable to people. It's got to be some equity issue. It needs to be reasonably straightforward and efficient in terms of processing, otherwise it just won't get through. And it needs to be sufficient. There's a tendency to focus only on the tiny bit of cost, it's the additional cost of the technology. And I think we need to think a bit carefully about that. More is probably needed. It could be some kind of loan grant system, tax incentives, some combination of those things. I think it will need public investment to prime that finance market. I was briefly involved in the European Energy Efficiency Finance Group, and the finance institutions there said, we've got the capital, we see the market, we see the potential. There's two things we need to de-risk investment: a competent system for certifying builders and a competent system for certifying buildings. We haven't got either. So as far as we're concerned, it's a bit too risky as an investment proposition. So that takes you back to the earlier piece. And then there's this point about VAT, which is a lot of the work that goes on in this industry is cash in hand outside the regulated system, and people can avoid 20% VAT. But if we reduce the VAT content of building work, then it would reduce that incentive to have it done in the sort of parallel economy in theory. There's a few more things to say about VAT, but I'm short on time, so questions comes up. 3 recent reports. The one on the left is something which was done through the Construction Leadership Council, which I sit on, the domestic retrofit group. And it's quite an interesting report. It talks about how you have to have all of these components of the system interlocked in place. The one in the middle is a report that Tina and Marina and others and I did last year with the Federation of Master Builders and CREDS, building on our strengths, which says a lot of the things I'm saying in this talk. And then the one on the right, most recently, that was actually produced just last month, I've been working with some people in the Department of Education here in Oxford University, looking at this issue about skills and jobs in construction. And we've ended up with the title, A Complex Challenge for Jobs, Skills and Training, because it's not just a question of let's put on a course and we'll think so it's actually quite a bit more involved. Okay. That, I think, is it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Gavin. Do you want to come up, stay up here with Sam?
This is a very disconcerting room to present in because you've got 4 screens, the clock is behind you, and it's just a bit odd. Anyway, hello.
But you're the only people that matter. Not so we've got about 20 minutes for questions, and I'm holding this because I'm seeing if anyone online posts a question. So over to you. Who'd like to start? Yes, we've got one there and then one there. Question to you, Sam. I think towards the end of your talk, you mentioned that your heat pump system wasn't fabric first, and that others do. What's your view on that? And are you doing fabric second, if you like, as a result?
Yeah, good question. So when we spoke to Stonewater, they very much said, this is a big investment that you're asking us to make, and we could, we're doing this up and down the country. They have a large budget for this, and they were saying, we could do external wall insulation and tart up the properties at the same time, which is, and actually what you're asking us to do is internal. These, I think they're EPC C, so they're not too bad, but they could get to B with the same amount of investment. And so they were kind of going, why should we do the heat pump? And I think what sold it was being part of Energy Superhub Oxford and getting the exposure. so they are very much thinking, it's a trade-off. How do they spend their money best? And I think they are thinking insulation first, for good reason. They've costed out. They've got 26,000 properties, and they've costed out something like 300 million to achieve what they want. And actually, interestingly, as much as we would like to bash EPCs as being poor proxies for anything, it was interesting from their perspective. They are useful, particularly because they have the affordability and because their tenants are fuel poor. They were kind of like, no, it does tell us what we should do first, and that has got to, we do think about affordability. So that was one of the things I took away from that conversation. Thank you.
Before I was going to David, Gavin, can you just come this way a bit, because we have to stay near here so our online guests can hear us well. Yes.
So it's sort of a follow-on question to the previous question, actually, in terms of, you mentioned, of course, about this idea of comparison with these properties between storage heaters and heat pumps, but on buildings that are poorly insulated, grade C. So in some ways, yeah, you're going to see a difference. But then you mentioned, of course, about this idea of competing against gas. And is there a danger in some ways that some of the results you're going to get may be not that representative, because you're not within these properties taking a whole system approach of fabric and heat pump rather than, in comparison?
Yeah, I guess so. But then, well, actually, Stonewater did do insulation at the same time, I have to say, but not as part of this project, because they just thought, well, we're disrupting the tenants, so we might as well. And I think it was a question of upgrading from the 90s insulation in that case. So, but yeah, it's a fair point. And that, I guess, is the distortion of grant funding, isn't it? That they want to prove something rather than doing it. It's not market led. Yeah.
Did you have anything you wanted to add on that, Gavin?
Okay, I will. Sorry, it's a little piece. You would repeat the same trial in a different set of properties with different characteristics, maybe, to get a bigger picture. I think it's still valid.
Hi, I'm Brenda Borman. Very sorry I missed the earlier part. I have been online earlier, heard of it. I've got 2 questions, one for each of you, or whoever wants to ask. With my fuel poverty hat on, I'm wondering if we should push people as fast as we can into heat pumps just to get them off the gas, because it's the gas prices that are going up the quickest. That's point number 1. And for Gavin, a friend of mine who's a green advocate, as most of us are, is going around saying, I don't think you could do it, but she's actually saying, let's do less new construction so we liberate the workers to work on retrofit. That if we're short of skilled people to work on retrofit, could we grab them from the new construction industry?
Do you want to take that one first, and then we'll come back to Sam's? Or do you want time to think?
Let's do Sam's first. I'll think about it.
My quick answer is my understanding is that electricity prices are pretty scary as well, right?
Yeah, but they're not going up as fast.
Right.
Because we've got the offsetting effect of renewables.
Yeah, I mean, whatever we can do to accelerate heat pump adoption.
Even if it means not insulating first.
Can I answer the question? I'll try and answer the question. When the heat and building strategy came out at the end of last year, there was a whole flurry of interest that the government was going to start banning gas boilers. And the banning of your heating system is much more salient and real to people than these nebulous questions about insulation and energy performance and stuff. Just after that, I looked in The Guardian. This is totally unrepresentative, but in The Guardian, they had found 4 people who had had heat pumps installed, 2 of whom as customers, 2 of whom said, best thing I've ever had, most wonderful technology ever, we're warm and comfortable, the bills are affordable, brilliant. One person said, it's a complete and utter waste of time and money. I wish I'd never done it. It's the most expensive way of not getting the service that you want I've ever seen. I've spent £10,000 on cold. And then there was someone in the middle who said, well, I'm not really sure because, I don't know. If you take that as a representative sample, which it's not, if you had 25% of the market were completely dissatisfied with the quality of the thing that had been given to them because it had been sold as a green source of heating, but actually it doesn't give you heat when it's coldest outside, then I think that's a huge problem. And you could destroy confidence in that market quite quickly. And when you look at the bigger picture, the Heat Pump Association and various others know that there's an issue with the skills and capabilities of the workforce to do it in this country. And then you could get a thing about sizing heat pumps. And if you haven't insulated your home, you need a bigger one, and then you're running it more, and then the cost thing comes in again. But I think the key weakness is, can we do it well enough?
Gavin, I fully, utterly understand that if we didn't have an energy price crisis.
Hold on, before you respond, David, is this about this particular?
It was a statement. So in some ways, one of the issues though is trust, because you only need one of those 4 people to say that actually this is the worst thing I've ever done, and you probably put off another 60% of the market that were thinking about it because they're not willing to risk the scale of investment that's required, especially if they're probably going to move in 5 years' time.
I think it can work. My straw poll of The Guardian, straw poll of 4 shows that it can work. It also shows that it sometimes really doesn't work.
But it doesn't work often when it's on its own. And that sounds like somebody that's probably done a heat pump without the rest of the system.
But if your comparison is, can I get a gas boiler fitted? Then you can pretty reliably get a gas boiler fitted.
Yeah, it's very difficult to have a bad gas boiler fit.
Because this has got an interesting discussion and talks about non-representative straw polls. Is there anyone else who's got a particularly strong view on Brenda's question about whether you push for heat pumps regardless of the insulation piece? Yes.
I think at current prices, or April the 1st prices, electricity is still 3 to 4 times more expensive than gas. So you're not going to win by having a heat pump. But we are in a world.
Coefficient of performance.
Now that take into account the coefficient of performance. The electricity cost for a heat pump and the gas cost for a boiler will be about the same after April the 1st. But we are in a world where wholesale gas prices might double again. And there you're right that the effect on gas prices will be bigger than on electricity prices, but not that much bigger, because actually the price of electricity is not moderated by renewables. The price of electricity is determined by the price of gas.
Okay, hold on. So is this on this theme? Yes, go for it. Yeah, and then.
So I would have 2 things on that. So one thing is, how do we think about people who still use gas for cooking? Because if you have to have gas in the house anyways, and you just replace the heat pump, is there any idea of dealing with the gas for cooking thing as well? Because otherwise you have to deal with both technologies at the same time.
Well,
and
sorry, just
the
on
second
yeah,
question is, then you can fire up. And the second question would be, are we considering also in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Because if we say a lot of methane is still coming from somewhere, we don't know exactly where it's coming from. It might be that like heating with gas is actually a big problem just in terms of methane production. So do we consider this aspect as well?
Hold on, I'm going to hoover these up because there was one more, and then one more, and then one more, and then we'll come back to you guys.
Can you summarise the question?
Yes.
I need to do my skills.
We're going to come to that. We're going to come to skills. Yeah, we're still on the heat pump first. You see what you've triggered now, Brenda? This, yes, go on.
I would probably support Sam's approach in terms of whether you do fabric first. There's a further question about EPCs, but if we're using that as a standard that most people can relate to, then I think if you're either an EPC C or above, then maybe you do go for heat pumps. If you're below, I think you've got to do fabric first.
There was a. I know. I'm
Hold
not
on.
allowed to- I'm not allowed
There
to
was one
answer,
more
sorry.
comment. One more comment.
Well, it was just the point that mentioned about coefficient of performance, but coefficient of performance is really dependent, of course, on actually how well insulated your building is. And you know, if you've got an under D in-house, then your coefficient of performance will be nowhere near the rated or stated by the manufacturer. And that's the tricky part. You know, your customers buy these things thinking they're going to get the coefficient, 3 times coefficient performance. They don't. Who faces the risk on that?
And final contribution to this discussion.
So yeah, also Brenda's suggestion, which I like, but there are two unknowns. One I think we have control over, the other we don't. The one we don't is the electricity price, and as much as I'd like to be able to predict it, I think that's a mug's game, as we've known the last couple of years, maybe, or some knew before, that that's really hard. So there's a risk. It may pay off, it may not. That we have no control over, but you can mitigate the danger by having a high quality installation that improves your coefficient performance. And I would then turn the question around, you know, what can we do to ensure that the people who, say, get heat pumps shoved down their throat don't have a bad experience? And by experience, I probably mean both the comfort and bills.
So final comments on this, including the specific questions about gas for cooking and fugitive methane emissions.
Fugitive methane is an interesting idea. I mean, yeah, if there is a risk there, then that's even more reason to get off fossil fuels, isn't it? And there are just not so many risks with electricity. But on cooking, Ken's, this is something that they deal with. That, I mean, people, you know, I love my gas hob is a thing that people sometimes roll out, and actually the standing charge, because you're obviously using a very small amount of gas if that's all you're using it for, but the standing charge makes it just astronomically expensive. And so they literally said that they have bought people an oven because it just makes the difference, or like just an induction hob, and that makes the difference. And of course, people who say they love their gas hob haven't used an induction because they're way better. So
I love my gas hob. I'm going to say it's a relatively small amount of total consumption. So the reason we're focusing on heating and hot water is because it's 3/4 of everything in-house, and cooking is 5%. But it's a good point.
So back to Brenda's second question: should we be liberating construction workers from the new build industry into the retrofit industry?
How? No, it's a serious question, because there's two things. There's a shortage of labour in the industry, and it's very cyclical. It's very boom and bust. It follows economic cycles really closely. But there's a shortage of labour and there's a shortage of skills. And people often equate the two, and they say the way we're going to improve the skills is by recruiting people and training them, and they're young people. If you haven't got enough people in the industry to do the work, how are you going to persuade them to do what you've just described? There's a lot of the firms that I've spoken to, one of the things they value about their work life is that they're relatively autonomous, i.e. they don't answer to a big boss. They don't, they will switch between being self-employed and working for a bigger company. But if they're going to go and work for a house builder, then they're probably going to not enjoy it so much as working on their own. So how would you persuade them to do it? Don't know. But then also we need more homes, don't we? I mean,
Well,
we-
why should we be building brand new homes which are semi-good and leaving the 27 million that are dreadful in that state?
Well, what we should be doing is building lots and lots of really good quality new ones, enough for everybody in a socially just and equitable way, and retrofitting the existing stock. So if we, if we're going to get into the realms of what we should be doing, don't get me started.
Well, this was, you might not have heard it, Brendan, but this morning, the chap from Oxfordshire County Council said that the new build programme for Oxfordshire alone would use up the entire county's carbon budget. That just the new build programme on its own. I think that was embodied.
That was embodied carbon.
That's scope 3, yeah.
Oh, is that? Oh,
No, so he was talking about. But let me come back to just one more thing on heat pumps and skills.
would max the scope 3 budget? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Heat
so
pumps,
there is
skills,
no
but also fabric first at this point. With Tina and I just been working on a paper where we've been interviewing really experienced practitioners in the construction industry. And one of them said, fabric first isn't right. Actually, what you want is understanding first. So we tend to think of fabric first as a sort of shorthand because it means that you don't forget the energy efficiency. But what this means is, especially in relation to heat pumps, you have to understand the whole building as a system. And the understanding has to be applied at the point of that building by the people on the ground doing it, or in the design team, or wherever. So there is an important distinction between understanding first and fabric first. They may actually lead to the same endpoint in practical terms, but I think the distinction is important. And the reason for that is actually going back to the technology of boilers versus heat pumps, for example. A lot of the cleverness of boiler technology is in the boiler. And when you're working with heat pumps, you do need to understand the system more broadly. There was a colleague from the University of Westminster who did a really interesting study about the implications for knowledge and skills of the switch from boilers to heat pumps. And it's much harder to take the cleverness out and put it in the technology with that heat pump system because of the drop-off in performance that comes off of the load of other things.
Okay, we're going to take two final questions together and then back to you. So first there and then second one there.
So when you say there's a skills shortage, what are the specific skills? So there's a lot of very skilled plumbers. There's a lot of very skilled heating engineers. So what is the exact skills? If you were to say, right, these are the top 3 skills that we need these groups of people to have, what actually are they? Right?
Okay, hold that thought and then second question.
Okay, on the radio today, it was talking about reducing your flow rates on your boiler temperature. And condensing boilers have been around for 10 years at least now. And often flow rates are set to about 70 degrees, which means you don't get the 20% saving on the condensing load. So that hasn't been told to the users of these boilers when they're commissioned. The plumbers probably don't realise that, I suspect, anyway. And when it comes to heat pumps, huge savings can be made by simply using the system well and controlling it well. And there needs to be something at the user level operating properly.
So, okay, so let's do skills first and then come to user awareness of efficiency opportunities second.
If I had to go back to 3, in answer to your question, it's what I had on the slide. Technical, business management, communications.
But what in the technical?
Well, so you only said 3, and so I'm going to give you those 3 because if I only focus on the technical, then I lose the other 2. And I would argue at that level, you've got to have those 3 in place. They're equally important as each other. Within the technical, we specialise much too early. So people are carpenters or builders or plumbers or electricians before they understand buildings. There's no foundation course in how energy in buildings works. There's no shared understanding. There's no shared responsibility taking for final outcomes. So you would have to reform the training structure pretty much.
So in reality, shouldn't we actually reform the design industry, because builders build to design? So it's actually how the buildings are designed in the first place.
No, in the repair maintenance industries, they're not designed. The design work is done as you go along. And even if there is a design to start with, the building will pretty much always hold surprises for you. So you have to adapt the design as you go along. And the people who are doing that real life design work in real time as they're going along are the ones on site. There isn't a remote designer who's saying, oh, you found a problem, right, I'll just retweak the thing. That's not how it works.
this conversation might nicely segue into the coffee break with the two of you, perhaps just to give the final word to Sam on user awareness of technological functionality.
Well, first thing, as you said, heard from the CCC guy Mike this morning, that government doesn't like communicating that we need to do any change. But so there's that. But then on yesterday's Costing the Earth, there was really, this came up actually, and they had Emma Pidgebeck, who's the chief executive of Energy UK, representing the industry, and James Murray, who's a think tank guy, and they were saying, you know, the industry have got their fingers burned many times in the last couple of years for telling people to jump on, right, that kind of thing, and I mean, some of them are really stupid, like eat ginger, right? But you know, I think they you know, they've backed off because they've got their fingers burnt, and in the tabloid press goes mad at them for kind of nanny state. So that everyone has retreated, and Emma Pidgebeck from the industry was kind of saying, yeah, no, British Gas and E.ON don't want to put these messages out there. So I think it's really problematic. But their answer, which was good, which is we need to partner with Citizens Advice and make sure it's their messaging. And then James Murray from Business Green, I think he was, said, you know, what happened to the government campaigns? You know, I think 15 years ago, Act on CO2 is one I remember, where the government would actually do a proper kind of national campaign on your carbon footprint. And of course, we can critique that as kind of victim blaming and those kinds of things. But actually, yeah, turning thermostat, that's not a message that gets out there. And I think it's become so politically sensitive. So I think that we do need to go back and revisit that messaging and literacy, those kind of questions.
Brilliant. So thank you very much for a very kind of engaged discussion and discussion. Lots of questions, I think, still to pursue. So be back here for 10 to 4 when this session continues. But now we've got a break. And just last thing to thank Sam and Gavin very much. Yeah.
It's busy, bigger.
It's so ironic because like for so many
We were having BBC at lunchtime.
Yeah, whenever people come to your
We don't have it. Somebody was just
Yeah. So well, it was sort of looking, yeah, because we haven't quite got into the very fine detail because we no, he was an EPG and
I remember him well.
but no, so I think that was
She's still.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah, you hadn't been, I think you were pretty, I guess the cooling, like the AC was kind of just take you off, yeah, that's fantastic.
Potentially.
Oh, okay, all right. Oh, great. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so you've still got a while, actually. Okay, very nice. Yeah, no, it's it's good. And so
that's right.
setting up my research group and just starting working out that use of the city, right? It's been kind of lived there for a while, but don't really feel like I have, right? So it's more like that. Oh, was he an EPG? Oh, I didn't even realize that. That's so funny. Yeah, because he just left, I think, in the last couple of months. Although he was sort of, I think they kind of kept him there because they were like, no, you're leaving us, and our teaching program is collapsing because of that or something. So so was he like supervised by Malcolm? Right. I guess so, yeah. I mean, now he's gone back, I think, to be assistant professor in research, right? Okay. So he must have been, I guess Okay, so wasn't that because I joined at the end of 2016, like November 2016. So I guess how long would you or he have left? Okay, well, small world, yeah, no, it's crazy. I didn't even realize there was that connection. Did you know Costas was at, because he was at Edinburgh as well, did you know he was at EPG previously?
I don't think we've connected.
He's kind of an electrical machines person, right?
Yeah, it was.
So I think he was like a lecturer at Edinburgh, and I think he's now moved to be an assistant or assistant professor in Greece, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think a lot of the, I know a lot of the people who researchers in the UK trying to get like these type positions back home or whatever. It's sort of challenging, I think, right? Well, probably that too, yeah. No, I think that's, yeah, that's right. So I still have like kind of these like Monday, Zoom meetings with Malcolm and Farhad, but Farhad's in Australia. So okay, so he's in the group. So, no, so it's just these like supervision meetings or whatever, right? So I'm not so involved with, I'm not like completely embedded still in Malcolm here, but I just something right.
And how big is
so in Edinburgh I've got like 3 PhD students and 2 postdocs, so it's kind of much. It's sort of taken, it's essentially I'm getting used to that. Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, no, it's nice. The people there are nice and stuff, so it's pretty good. But yeah, we're just starting to this kind of returning to like in-person working with, so that's a new thing.
And so how did it work like that?
I don't really. I think they defined like one PhD student sort of thing, but so that I could bring some funding from Oxford. So that's nice. And then they're kind of like go for collaborative project and all that stuff. And but they have some other things, like they do have some internal different mechanisms, things, and they're quite good about like introducing you to industry people, or they have some business development people there and stuff like that. So they're kind of supportive, but it's kind of like it is still like I guess it's a little bit different being like you're on your own, you have to create your own group instead of being in a group where Malcolm already knows everyone or something, right? So that's really funny. And it's funny, because it's kind of like I've just started working with some of the like Scottish local authorities and stuff like that. Whereas I guess here, it's like Melbourne already knows everyone right around Oxford knows really well and stuff. We're just kind of building those relationships. It sounds like the Killip program seems to be going very well, right? It's like an exciting area.
Like one way or the other.
Yes.
My favorite was
yes.
nothing. So the question is, what else could you do to reduce?
Question, so thank you
Well,
very
I think
much.
it sounded like what Malcolm was saying yesterday, you're sort of this kind of zero institute, right? And it sounded like there was a heating and cooling stream like within that. So okay, so there you go. So it seems like, in other words, okay, like heating and cooling is on the agenda or something. And this talk was very interesting for me because, like, yeah, this kind of stuff about the installing things and things like that is like very different from like very outside of my experience. But it's it sounds like it's like kind of a challenging area.
So she's joined the cooling program recently. Well, not recently, like it's just because I've come back recently.